Soul Food is a 1997 George Tillman Jr. drama about the Joseph family's descent into dysfunction after the matriarch goes into a coma. Josephine Big Mama Joseph, played by Irma P. Hall, and her 3 daughters gather with their families on Sundays and holidays to share a good meal. The tradition serves to keep them close while their sibling rivalries, meddling, and their raggedy cousin Faith threaten to push them apart. This is a movie that I've seen a million times. It's one of those movies from the 90s Black film canon that showcases Black culture and the Black experience. The characters feel like people you might know personally. Combined with the food and an incredible soundtrack is just a vibe. But Lem, played by Mekhi Phifer, and Bird, played by Nia Long, their wedding at the beginning of the film lets you know from jump that this is going to be some mess. There was no reason for their exes to be at the wedding. Do better. And then to add insult to injury, these shenanigans were actually funded by Terry, played by Vanessa L. Williams, as Bird and Lem couldn't afford this shindig on their own. And then Maxine, Vivica Fox, chimes in that Terry doesn't have to mention every time she pays for everything. Terry is persnickety, but they do always expect her to pay for everything. You're in love and want to get married? Great, that's beautiful. But why have a wedding that the two of you can't afford? An easy way to avoid Terry talking about what she's paid for is to live within your means and not ask her for money. And this is why Big Mama was so vital to this family, because she could step in and get her bobbleheaded kids together, though at points she contributed to the mess. The way she cut into Lem's dance with Old Girl was a really cute touch. It was a nice way of intervening and de-escalating the situation before it got out of hand. This is something that I really like about Black entertainment from the 90s. There are different stories to be told from within the Black community, and because projects were more diverse, there was something for everyone. Soul Food is a movie about a regular, degular family just living. They're doing okay for themselves and are at different stages of marriage. None of the characters are saints, nor are there any villains, except for Cousin Faith. More on her later. I like the backstory of Big Mama and Pops being from Mississippi and moving north to Chicago, where they were independent, started businesses, and raised these 3 daughters. Stories of people from the Great Migration and their descendants are interesting and more need to be told. I like the idea of having regular gatherings to keep the family connected. Even just sitting down as spouses with your kids to share meals doesn't always happen, but to make time to do that and also gather with your extended family at least once a week is nice. If I'm blessed to have a family of my own one day, I'd like to borrow the practice of having dinner every night with the people in my house and Sunday dinner and holidays with extended family. Though any Bird-esque chefs will be banned from the kitchen and the men will have to pitch in with the cooking. Tomorrow isn't promised, so you never know when the most recent time you've seen someone will be the last time you see someone. With that in mind, it's important to make time and to put in the effort to keep in touch with family. Except for Cousin Faith, because nobody needs to keep in touch with Cousin Faith. You could tell Cousin Faith was going to be a problem the moment she first appeared on screen. If everybody else is eating dinner at the table and Uncle Pete is locked up in his room, how did she get in the house? Not to mention, she was wearing a leopard print coat. Leopard print might have been the business back in the days, and is still the move for women of a certain age looking for action. It signals that a woman of a certain age is the female equivalent of a cat daddy, whatever you would call that. But just take a second and think of all the people you know who were kids in the 1970s, but rocking leopard print in the 90s. I bet you all of them are a hot mess. Something that I didn't notice during previous viewings is that in addition to Terry, neither Maxine nor Bird looked happy when Faith popped up. And Maxine was the first to state that Faith wasn't welcome to stay with her family at her house. She doesn't go into detail about her reasoning, but makes it known. Yet she then turns around and volunteers Terry's house as a shelter for their problematic relative. Mama Jo's the only person that's happy to see Faith. Why can't she just stay at her house? She's going to cause trouble anyway. During a later conversation with Faith the Floozy, Terry mentioned some of the trifling ways in which she'd previously taken advantage of sweet old Mama Jo. So obviously Faith being a mess is not a new thing. Despite the 2 wayward Joseph sisters fussing about Terry, she always comes through in the clutch, like she's there for the family. But in this instance, Terry should have told Cousin Faith ain't no room at the inn and she doesn't have a manger. Figure something out and don't come to her house. The pastor man was a creep, and Faith seemed willing to do something strange for some change. Let her stay with him. He'd probably welcome the company. When it rains, it pours. Cousin Faith and her leopard print coat are a bad omen. But all jokes aside, Big Mama's decline in health due to complications from diabetes is an important conversation to have in general, but especially within the Black community. The family gatherings are nice, and as with many cultures, are centered around food, but the dishes prepared aren't the healthiest options. Many are high in fat, salt, and or sugar. Having these foods on occasion in moderation is fine, but years of eating this food on what I'm sure is a daily basis is unhealthy and was most likely a contributing factor to Big Mama's diabetes. Then you also have Bird making things even worse with her super salty, terrible cooking. This is something that my mom and I argue about all the time, and while she's come around a bit, there's still some work to be done. My family's from the Caribbean where it's hot, and our recent ancestors were primarily farmers and fishermen. Before that, at least some were likely enslaved. Some of our traditional foods, such as cornmeal porridge, dumplings, and provisions, are very carb-heavy. Our ancestors who earned their living farming and fishing needed those carbs because the work was physically demanding. Not to mention, they walked everywhere. We can keep the essence of those dishes, but need to adjust for our lifestyles because they aren't as physically demanding. Thus, we won't burn off those carbs and calories. Reimagine old family recipes and find ways to manage the flavor while reducing sugar, salt, and fat. Terry is not the easiest person to get along with, but in both the movies as well as the series, hands down, she was my favorite sister and character overall. I dig ambitious women who are about their business. The movie didn't have as much time to flesh out her character, so at points, she comes across as being a bit of a jerk. The family constantly asks her for money, but then complains about her pointing out that she constantly gives them money. When financial issues arise as a result of their mom's medical bills, their automatic solution is to ask Terry to pay for it. Miles is also a lawyer, but he's not passionate about the law. They have serious communication problems in their relationship. Relationships are built on honest and open communication, and if they aren't talking to each other about their plans, then that's a problem. Faith came to stay with Terry and Miles at the very moment that they needed time to themselves if they were going to get back on track. I felt for them trying to do right after making some mistakes, but having a hard time while trying to find a job. He's a trooper for sitting there and even trying to eat that struggle plate of Bird's dried up and burnt cooking. Sometimes it helps to discuss sensitive topics with someone a bit removed from the situation, but in trying to build a life with Bird, he shouldn't be keeping secrets like this from her. With Big Mama's health issues taking a turn for the worse, it added stress to the family dynamic and intensified the drama. Some of the bad blood between Terry and Maxine is a result of Terry having dated Kenny first, but him cheating on her with Maxine. Granted, they were all high school students at the time, but they were old enough to know better. As a result, Terry seems to be a bit jealous of Maxine because she's married with kids. But Maxine seems to also be insecure that she's a stay-at-home mom while Terry has a successful career and Bird is running her own salon. Everybody should just live the best version of the lives they have rather than worrying about what other family members have that they don't. Terry should have made more of an effort to be supportive of Miles, but she also has a lot going on. They should have sat down, talked, and created a plan for balancing his music aspirations. Quite often in these stories, the wife is the saint while the husband is an ogre. Soul Food tries a role reversal, but it still plays into the, she doesn't understand me and isn't fun excuse for cheating. Leaving behind his law career is a big life change for Miles, and Terry seems fairly dismissive of his dreams. I can understand Miles breaking up with Terry because they're on different paths in life, but I don't condone his cheating. Typically, when a person in a relationship cheats, it's their fault rather than the other man or woman, right? I'm not even concerned with them. In this case, I also had smoke for Faith because she's Terry's cousin, and specifically because Terry offered her a place to stay in her time of need. She might have her ways, but Terry took her in when none of the other sisters wanted to. One minute, she's calling Miles her cousin, fam, etc., and the next minute she's pushing up on him. It's gross. Kenny cheating on Terry with Maxine was also gross, but they were like high schoolers. Where did Faith go after the dust-up at the party? She managed to find a place, didn't she? That's where her and that coat should have been from the beginning. Faith was a hobosexual, a person trying to start a romantic relationship to have a place to stay. The two met and clicked because they both had these artistic aspirations about which others were dismissive. To be carried on in this woman's house is incredibly disrespectful. Faith picked up on the issues between Terry and Miles and started making a play for Miles at the first opportunity. Miles, at least at first, wasn't giving her that energy. She pursues him by finding little ways to stroke his ego. He was initially just being nice and liked the attention that she was giving him. Meanwhile, Faith is in the house, ear hustling on his conversations with Terry. You know, see how she somehow managed to pop up at his show? Cousin Faith was chatting up Miles for some sympathy and a place to stay. Miles helps Faith out with her audition, and after her pursuit intensifies. For example, Miles and Terry live in a big house for it to be just the two of them. He leaves Faith in the living room and goes upstairs to the rooftop studio. There was no reason for her to follow him up there. She could have found something to do, like get the newspaper and look for a day job. But she left the whole rest of the house to go upstairs and talk to him. Yet Miles was the one in the relationship, and he should have told her to stop and go away. But this is a character portrayed by Michael Beach, and it was the 90s, so you know eventually it's going to be some mess. This was just 2 years after he was giving Bernie the Blues and Wayne Next Hill, and 8 years after flipping Destin Lean on Me. In his younger days, Michael Beach was hired to have no behavior. I will say that at least initially, Terry showed some self-control. Regardless of their issues, she loves and cares for Miles, so to walk in and witness his entanglement would be heartbreaking. Vanessa Williams did a great job conveying those emotions without words. But being caught off guard and having Ahmad with her caused Terry to make the wise decision to walk away instead of immediately reacting in anger. There are problems we all deal with, especially the death of a loved one. If you live long enough, you'll likely have someone that you love pass away. Yet during those stressful times, people don't always present their best selves. Samuel was a chump for trying to show off on Lem. I won't give him any more energy than that. Lem should have ignored that cornball. Firstly, because he's an adult, and secondly, because he has a record and needs to stay out of trouble. His interaction with Bird was over the top and unnecessary. It shows that Lem is immature and lacks self-control. Sometimes when people are trying to goad you into giving them a reaction, the best response is to not give them the energy that they want. And Bird is simple for thinking that going on a date with Samuel to get Lem a job was a good idea. Call me petty. But it was nonsense and incredibly disloyal to accept Miles and Faith back into the fold. I get we're family and should be there for each other, yada yada yada, but Faith is a bum who boated herself off the family island. Terry and Miles didn't have kids, but she gets to keep the Joseph family to herself, and he can get Faith in her leopard print coat in the divorce. If Terry is my sister, we might fuss between ourselves, but in a situation like this, I don't care. I'm taking her side. So no, Ahmad, we're not family anymore because you don't do things like that to family. Faith can't blow into town like a hobo, purposely unleash destruction, and then everyone is cool. Nope, she and Miles have to kick rocks. Somebody else can play piano while you sing in the living room. I think part of this has to do with the gender of the people involved. People are a lot more willing to forgive the person doing the cheating if it's a man versus when it's a woman. I'm fairly certain that if this had been 3 brothers and one of their wives cheated, or it was still 2 sisters, but Terry was instead their brother whose wife had cheated with their cousin, this story would have gone a whole other way. That cheating woman would have been cut off, called everything but a child of God, and uninvited from all future gatherings, as she should be. Lem shows up after being released from prison and sits down to speak with Ahmad and Bird to apologize for what happened, as he lets both Bird and Ahmad down. But then he started arguing semantics while apologizing to Ahmad, letting Ahmad know that he didn't beat up Bird, but rather just pushed her. People use these rationalizations, but the two actions aren't that far apart. The fact is that he used an act of aggression to express his anger and intimidate Bird. Bird's logic and actions were incredibly inappropriate and unacceptable for someone in an exclusive relationship, but Lem's reaction was also unacceptable. His justifications start us down the slippery slope of this ideology that men can soothe their bruised ego after being cheated on by becoming violent with their partner or the other man. What happens the next time he gets angry, or whether right or wrong, he believes someone else is interested in Bird, or vice versa? And to be fair, it added some drama to the movie, but Terry pulling a knife was crazy as well. Violence or the threat of violence, regardless of gender, can't be the solution to dealing with heartbreak. You offer this ne'er-do-well a place to stay, and instead of being grateful, she ups the ante by doing her best to be a homosexual? No, neither one of you can have a plate. Certainly not to eat at my mama's table or even in full to go. All that fried chicken, fish, black-eyed peas, collards, and whatnot, put it all back. Take all of that mayonnaise potato salad because it's disgusting, especially if Bird made it. I wouldn't even offer you a drink of water. You better cup your hands and get some from the neighbor's hose. You're sitting here asking Faith and Miles not to run away, but where's the compassion and understanding for Terry? To then turn around and throw their entanglement up in her face as though it's her fault. Why are you so quick to forgive and to welcome them back into the fold? Some of that unnecessary hostility comes from the way she and her sisters communicate. You shouldn't have that contention with family and can't have that in a marriage. Miles certainly didn't help matters by getting involved with Faith. It's family, but they say some downright vicious things to each other. The savage way they treat each other isn't new and should have been checked when they were kids. The family dynamic was frustrating, but the dysfunction was also real. There are Big Mama's health issues and a family coping with the loss of an elder that kept them together, but also their relationship drama is complicated by being unemployed, drifting apart, exes popping up, people wearing leopard print, etc. It's 20 plus years later and soul food still has replay value. Soul food tells a story to which most people, regardless of their background, can relate. It also helps that the acting is good and the soundtrack was fire. Thanks for tuning in. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my movie review playlist. Go ahead and click the thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share it on social media.